Selling your own blood for pocket change, you goddamn loser, girl.
Well, listen to the champion of the world.
Sally Field has spent her entire career being honest in a way that most Hollywood actors simply are not. She won 2 Oscars. She survived being typecast, dismissed, and underestimated for years before the industry caught up with what she actually was. When she finally wrote her memoir and started giving interviews where she said what she truly thought, people listened. One of those comments was about a co-star, a specific man on a specific film set, described in terms so direct and final that people could hardly believe she said it out loud. She did. And once you hear the full story of what happened between them and everything she carried before walking onto that set, you will completely understand why she said it. The set where everything went wrong. The film that brought Sally Field and Tommy Lee Jones together was called Back Roads, released in 1981. It was not a massive blockbuster or a career-defining project for either of them. It was a road movie about a prostitute and a drifter traveling through the American South, directed by Martin Ritt, who had a solid reputation for serious, character-driven work. On paper, the combination of Field and Jones should have produced something electric. Both were serious actors with genuine ability. Both had already demonstrated they could carry a film. What actually happened on that set was something neither of them has ever fully walked back from. Sally Field has described working with Tommy Lee Jones as one of the most unpleasant professional experiences of her life. She said she hated him more than anyone she had ever worked with. That is a significant statement from a woman who had been in Hollywood since her teens, who had worked with hundreds of people across decades of film and television, and who is not given to exaggeration for effect. When she says she hated him more than anyone, she means it literally. She is comparing it to every other difficult working relationship she has had, and ranking this one above all of them. The source of the problem was not a single incident or a specific argument that spiraled out of control. It was something more pervasive and more exhausting. A fundamental clash between 2 people who approached their work in ways that were incompatible and who had no interest in meeting each other halfway about it. Sally Field's approach to acting is rooted in emotional openness. She brings herself to a role, finds the genuine feeling underneath the dialogue, and builds a performance from the inside out. That approach requires a certain kind of trust and a certain kind of collaborative atmosphere on set. It requires other people to be present with her, to take the work seriously without making it a competition, and to treat the vulnerability involved in that kind of performance with basic professional respect. Tommy Lee Jones had a different reputation entirely. He was known for being intense, exacting, and not particularly concerned with making the people around him comfortable. He had strong opinions about how scenes should be played and was not shy about expressing them. He could be dismissive of approaches that differed from his own, and his manner with co-stars was described by people who worked on various productions with him as ranging from demanding to outright difficult. On the set of Back Roads, those 2 energies collided in a way that crew members described as genuinely uncomfortable to be around. The atmosphere was tense in the specific way that comes from 2 people who actively dislike each other being required to spend long days in close physical proximity for the duration of a film shoot. Field has said that many of the scenes they shared did not require her to act angry or frustrated because she already was, and that she channeled the real feelings she had toward Jones directly into her performance. There is something interesting in that, actually. The conflict that made their working relationship miserable produced on-screen tension that critics noticed and responded to. The film's performances were praised for their rawness and authenticity. The audience watching the movie had no idea that what they were seeing was not 2 skilled actors generating chemistry, but 2 people who genuinely could not stand each other, finding a way to make that useful. The professional result and the personal reality could not have been more different. Who she was before she ever met him. To understand why the Tommy Lee Jones situation hit Sally Field the way it did, you need to understand what she had already been through to get to the point where she was standing on that film set. because by 1981, she had already fought harder for her career than most people realize. She was born in Pasadena, California, in 1946, into a family with entertainment connections. Her mother was an actress, and her stepfather was a stuntman and actor, which meant she grew up around the industry without being handed anything by it. She was a shy kid who found performing gave her a way to be seen and taken seriously, which is a combination that tends to produce driven adults. Her first major television role came in 1965 with Gidget, a sitcom about a teenage surfer girl. It was a hit, the audience loved her, and it should have launched her smoothly into a solid career. Instead, it trapped her. After Gidget came The Flying Nun, which ran from 1967 to 1970. She played a cheerful young nun who could fly, which is exactly as strange as it sounds, and the show was popular, which made the trap tighter. She was funny, she was likable, and the industry decided that was all she was. For years after The Flying Nun ended, she could not get anyone to take her seriously as a dramatic actress. She was the girl from Gidget. She was the flying nun. The roles she was offered reflected what the industry thought she was capable of, which was not very much. She has talked about this period with considerable honesty, describing how demoralizing it was to know she had more to offer and to keep running into an industry that had already made up its mind about her. She refused to accept that verdict. She studied acting seriously with Lee Strasberg at the Actors Studio, which was not a casual decision. The Actors Studio was where people went when they were serious about the craft in a very specific and demanding way, and committing to that training was her way of saying that she intended to compete on a different level than the one the industry was offering her. The investment paid off when she was cast in Sybil in 1976, a made-for-television movie about a woman with dissociative identity disorder. The role required her to play multiple distinct personalities across a single performance, which is one of the more technically demanding things an actor can be asked to do. She was extraordinary in it, won an Emmy, and suddenly the industry was looking at her differently. Then came Norma Rae in 1979, where she played a textile worker who becomes a union organizer, and the scene where she stands on a table holding a sign that says, "Union" became one of the most iconic images in American film history. She won her first Academy Award for it. After years of being dismissed, she had made a case that nobody could argue with. When she walked onto the set of Back Roads in 1981, she was not an insecure newcomer hoping for approval. She was a woman with an Oscar and a decade of hard-earned credibility, which made being treated dismissively by Tommy Lee Jones something she had absolutely no patience for. The Burt Reynolds years and what they taught her. One of the reasons the Tommy Lee Jones dynamic was so specifically maddening for Sally Field was that she already understood, from direct personal experience, how a complicated relationship with a difficult man could affect both her work and her sense of herself. The Burt Reynolds chapter of her life had already taught her that lesson, and it was a significant one. Her relationship with Reynolds began around the time they filmed Smokey and the Bandit together in 1977. The movie was a massive hit, a fun and completely ridiculous car chase comedy that made Reynolds one of the biggest box office stars in the world, and introduced the two of them as an on-screen couple who had real chemistry. Audiences loved them together. The studio loved that audiences loved them together, and they made several more films as a pair. Off-screen, they were genuinely involved. Reynolds has said in interviews and in his memoir that he considered Field the love of his life. Field's account, as laid out in her own memoir, published in 2018, is more complicated and more honest. She cared deeply about him. She was also dealing with someone who had significant difficulty with vulnerability, with emotional intimacy, and with allowing another person to have needs that competed with his own. Reynolds was famous, and he knew it, and he operated accordingly. Field has described the relationship as one where she often felt like a supporting character in his story, rather than a full person with her own priorities. He was not cruel in the way that Tommy Lee Jones was professionally dismissive, but he was, in his own way, difficult to be in an equal relationship with because the industry and his own self-image did not quite allow for the idea that the woman beside him was as important as he was. They broke up in 1980. The separation was painful in the specific way that endings are painful when you genuinely cared about someone and also genuinely needed to leave. They had an on and off period for a couple of years after the official breakup before things ended permanently in 1982. What the relationship gave her, beyond the personal experience of it, was clarity about what she needed from the people around her professionally and personally. She needed to be treated as an equal. She needed her contributions to be respected. She had put too much work into becoming the actress she had become to accept being managed or patronized or handled by anyone, whether it was a romantic partner or a co-star. This is the context in which the Backroads conflict lands harder. She had just come through years of fighting to be taken seriously, a painful relationship with one of the most famous men in Hollywood, and the achievement of winning an Oscar that proved what she had always known about her own abilities. And then she walked onto a film set and encountered a man who treated her like she didn't know what she was doing. The anger that produced was not just about Tommy Lee Jones. It was about every person who had ever underestimated her, and he happened to be the one standing in front of her when the accumulated frustration finally had a specific target. The 2 Oscars and what it took to earn them. There is a version of Sally Field's career that gets simplified down to the "you like me, you really like me" speech, which she gave when she won her 2nd Academy Award, and which has been quoted and misquoted and occasionally mocked ever since. The actual speech was more nuanced than the famous line suggests, and the story of how she got to that moment is considerably more interesting than the moment itself. Her first Oscar came for Norma Ray in 1979. The film was based on the real story of Crystal Lee Sutton, a textile worker in a North Carolina mill who became involved in union organizing efforts during the 1970s. Field's performance was physical, emotionally raw, and deeply committed in a way that made it impossible to watch without understanding that she had genuinely inhabited the character rather than playing her from a comfortable distance. The Academy recognized it, and the win confirmed what Sybil had suggested 3 years earlier. She was one of the best working actresses of her generation. The second Oscar came for Places in the Heart in 1984, where she played a widow in Depression-era Texas, trying to save her farm and raise her children after her husband's sudden death. The film was quieter than Norma Ray and required a different kind of performance, less obviously dramatic, but in some ways more difficult, because it depended on small, accumulated moments rather than big, visible emotional peaks. She was exceptional in it. What both roles had in common was that they required her to play women who were fighting for survival without anyone doing it for them. Women who had to figure things out in difficult circumstances, with limited resources and a lot of external pressure. Field has said in interviews that she was drawn to those kinds of characters, which makes sense given her own biography. She knew what it felt like to fight for something against resistance that didn't take you seriously. Between those 2 films, she made Steel Magnolias in 1989, playing Malin Eatonton, a mother whose daughter has serious health problems and who carries the weight of that with a kind of stubborn love that refuses to collapse even under enormous pressure. The film had an extraordinary cast of women, including Dolly Parton, Olympia Dukakis, Shirley MacLaine, Daryl Hannah, and Julia Roberts in a breakout role. And the scene where Field's character breaks down at the cemetery after her daughter's funeral is one of the most emotionally devastating moments in the film. It is the kind of scene that gets remembered decades later, and Field played it with everything she had. The through line across all of these performances is a particular quality of honesty. She does not smooth things over. She does not make her characters more palatable or easier to watch than the material demands. She finds the genuine emotion in a scene and commits to it fully, which means the performances are sometimes uncomfortable to watch precisely because they are so real. That commitment to truth in her work is what makes the Tommy Lee Jones story so telling. She was not a person who accepted dishonesty or condescension in any form, not in her performances, and not from the person standing across from her on the set. The memoir, the honesty, and where she is now. In 2018, Sally Field published a memoir called In Pieces, and it was the kind of book that takes decades to write, even if you technically write it in a much shorter period. It was honest in a way that memoirs by people who still have something to lose tend not to be. And it covered territory that most people in her position would have left well enough alone. She wrote about her childhood in a way that was not designed to be sympathetic, but to be true. Her home life had been complicated. Her stepfather, the stuntman Jock Mahoney, was a figure whose presence in her life she has discussed with considerable complexity, and the emotional difficulties of that period shaped who she became in ways she was willing to examine in print. She wrote about the flying nun years with the combination of humor and genuine frustration that those years deserved. She was grateful for the career they gave her, and also genuinely constrained by what they did to how the industry saw her. And she did not pretend that those two things were easy to hold at the same time. She wrote about Burt Reynolds with honesty that was not cruel, but was direct. She described the relationship as complicated and the man as genuinely difficult to be in an equal partnership with. Reynolds died in 2018, the same year the memoir was published, which gave the sections about him an extra layer of weight for readers who encountered the book in its first year. She had said what she needed to say about that chapter of her life, and then he was gone. She wrote about winning her Oscars in a way that captured both the joy of the recognition and the specific relief of it. The sense of finally being seen accurately by an industry that had spent years not quite looking at her correctly. The famous line from her second acceptance speech, which she has had to clarify repeatedly over the years because it gets misquoted in ways that make it sound more needy than it actually was, came from a place of genuine emotion in the moment. She was not performing gratitude. She was experiencing it. After the memoir came out, she gave a series of interviews that expanded on the themes in the book, and the Tommy Lee Jones material surfaced in that context. It was not presented as a grudge or a score to settle. It was presented as part of an honest account of what her career had actually been like, including the parts that were not fun, the people who were not kind, and the experiences that tested her without being redeemable by any particular lesson. She is in her late 70s now, still working, still saying what she actually thinks. She did Broadway. She has taken film and television roles that interested her rather than roles that served a career strategy. She has 3 sons and a close relationship with her family. She has been sober and has spoken about that. She has the life of a person who survived something difficult by being honest about it rather than around it. The Tommy Lee Jones chapter is 1 page in a very long book, but it is the page that tells you the most about who she is. Sally Field spent years fighting to be taken seriously by an industry that kept underestimating her, only to end up on a film set with a co-star who treated her the same way the industry once had. Does that mean the people who underestimate strong women never really go away? They just keep showing up in different places? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. For more interesting stories like this, be sure to click on the next video that pops up on your screen. You never know what you'll discover next.